Welcome to Conservation Conversation with me, Kaz, from Ultimate Safari. We're very excited about our next series. Not only are we particularly passionate about leopards, as you may have seen from our logo, but in this case we have the opportunity to collaborate with what we believe is a significant contribution to conservation, our other passion. We take a dive into understanding what citizen science is and how we, as citizens, can contribute to research and ultimately the conservation of leopards in South Africa. There's a statement that you've made to me a couple of times, Marine, in the conversations that we've had leading up to this particular conversation, and that is the extinction of experience. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so basically the extinction of experience, I read about this on a paper, quite an old paper from like 1978. And it was explaining that the extinction of experience is one of the biggest threats for biodiversity worldwide, just because what we're realizing that people are not really connected with nature anymore. Like we're living in more and more like in bigger cities. We don't have access to nature. And when people don't have access to nature, to the wildlife, then if something disappears, they won't realize that it's actually gone and they won't realize the impact it has. So like the extinction of experience is like if people don't experience nature anymore and it disappears, it won't do anything to them, and then they won't be able to understand the impact of the global picture and so how it will impact them, and also what would be the consequences for nature in general. So that's what I thought it was a really interesting concept actually, that really like speak to me. So yeah, that's something I quite I use regularly.
I appreciate it, and I think I'm going to adopt it as my own. But because I think what it speaks to is effectively the biodiversity decline, which I mean, in a nutshell, is literally just habitat loss and fragmentation and degradation for pretty much all of wildlife across the globe. But let's not speak about global wildlife. Let's speak about one big cat that you are particularly attached to and fond of, and that, of course, is leopard. Let's just briefly touch on the Ingwe Leopard Research. What does Ingwe mean?
So Ingwe actually means leopard in two of the South African languages. So in Xhosa, so I can't do the click, and in Zulu. So this is what it means. But I think it also is used in other of the African languages, but I can't remember the whole list.
Yes.
But it means leopard.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's great that you've adopted an African concept to the title of your research. So well done there. Let's just go back to habitat loss. Obviously, with leopards being the big cats that they are, I understand that there's only 20% suitable leopard habitat in South Africa, and suitable habitat outside of protected areas as much as 63%. Obviously, there's a number of threats that face not only leopard but other large carnivores. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So what is quite interesting about the leopards is leopards don't tend to stay inside boundaries. They go through different reserves. They are really adaptable. And so that's one of the studies that was done in 2012, looked at the whole of like environmental data to try to estimate how much of South Africa is suitable for leopards. So that's how the 20% came from, looking at vegetation type, rainfall, temperature, etc. But what is interesting in that out of this 20%, about 60% is actually outside of protected areas. So it shows that most of the leopards are found outside. But I think what I'd like to mention about that is that although most of the leopards are actually normally outside protected areas, most of the research and most of the projects that are being done in South Africa is focusing on leopard inside of protected areas. So there is a bit of a discrepancy between the reality on the ground and what is actually happening in terms of research and conservation. But yeah, I think just to get back to like carnivores in general, or to like threats that these animals are facing. Of course, one of the biggest one, but what that includes for all of biodiversity in general is the habitat loss, the fragmentation, just because we are our population is growing, our human population is growing, our habitats are getting more and more fragmented. We need more and more land for farming, and then of course this is detrimental to all of the other species that we are coexisting with. So that would be, I think, like the biggest threat for leopards, but also for many other species in general. But yeah, there are a couple more threats that our leopards are facing, unfortunately.
Yes. Before we touch on those, can we just go back to the fact that most of the leopard projects are focusing on leopards populations within protected areas? I think this would be largely due to the fact that they are within a reasonably contained area, and so it makes it a little bit easier, right, to find them, watch them, record them, and keep some kind of track of them. So I would assume that any leopards that occur outside of protected areas, the reason for the lower number of leopard projects is because they are out there somewhere. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And then it means when you work in a reserve, of course, it's much easier. You just have to deal with reserve management, wardens, so it's much more, everything is more together. As soon as you look outside of protected areas, you have to deal with a whole different bunch of people, from farmers to residents to landowners. So it's much more difficult to implement anything when there's many more stakeholders involved in general. And of course, then it requires much bigger monitoring techniques, much more people on the ground, and the buy-in also from all of these people outside of protected areas. So it's definitely more challenging, and that's why the whole research is very skewed. But that doesn't mean that we should not try to change it back, though. A challenge is always a good challenge.
I agree, and I mean that's exactly what we're going to be chatting about in a little bit. Let's head back to other threats that our leopards are facing, particularly those that are sort of peri-urban.
I think one of the biggest threats to the leopard actually at the moment is probably the illegal poaching for their skins. So this is something that actually mainly happened in KZN through like a community that uses the skin for like cultural regalia. Luckily, there's quite a lot of work that is being done already to try to replace the real skin by fake fur. And there is very good progress that is being done there. And it's all to give the whole credit, it's all done by this big NGO Panthera. So they're doing massive amount of work there. So that's also changing a bit of like the cultural ways of doing things. So I would say that's one of the number one threats. Then globally, there is just illegal killing for body parts, that unfortunately are being exported to other countries. But then for more like urban areas or like areas that are highly fragmented, snares, snares are actually wire straps that are put in a circle, and then they initially designed for bush meat. So it's people who put them in reserve to try to catch some antelope, but unfortunately they're highly discriminatory. So it means that everything that goes through this get caught. And then so like wild dogs, leopards can get caught in those snares, and it's very terrible because unfortunately it's a lot of suffering. Some of these snares are put out there but are not being checked regularly. Some of them are just being forgotten about, left in the wild. So any animal that gets trapped in it will unfortunately suffer quite a great deal. So that's a very big issue. And snares are often found like on boundaries of reserves actually, because of course this is where there's most likely to be wildlife and game meat and all of that. So snares are quite a big issue. And then globally, it's also can be retaliatory killing from farmers when there is like livestock depredation. So that's something, it's difficult to blame the farmers because of course they're losing really valuable stock that can have like quite a big consequence on their livelihood in general. So they will have the tendency to shoot carnivores. Leopards are included, but it could be also from black-backed jackals are often also being targeted, hyenas. So this type of conflicts are also an issue. And then of course, one of the last one for in really urban areas could be roadkill. Although that's not something that happens, of course, every day. it is still a risk, and especially in those areas that are surrounded by reserves and we have a lot of wildlife crossing those roads. It's very dangerous for the animals, but also for the people. It can create very big accidents. So also measures should be taken on those roads to avoid having those animals being killed. And I think even in the Kruger Park, which is actually an area where there are like speed limits, speed bumps on all of that to mitigate the number of animals being killed. That's something that should be implemented in all these areas where all of these reserves are, just to encourage people to slow down and to be a bit more mindful about the animals living around. Whether it's a leopard or a bird, same. We need to protect all of them.
Yes, it reminds me of a recent incident that has happened in Cape Town, where a very much loved urban caracal, which is a lynx-like looking wildcat named Hermes. He's been around that long that he's been adopted by all the local neighborhoods, was unfortunately knocked down and killed by a car while he was trying to cross a road on the way back to wherever his den was. So we understand that they're a keystone species, but it sounds like they're also an umbrella species, so that by putting in measures to protect leopard, that by default, any other species below that, like a caracal or an impala or a bird, is automatically also then being protected.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why actually, like a lot of the research again is quite skewed towards some of the biggest species, just because, as you mentioned, they cover much more ground. So by protecting those species, then automatically you protect all of the other all of the smaller ones that those species like rely on, and you protect the whole ecosystem basically. So yeah, the umbrella species, it's very an important term actually.
Great. So while we are speaking about our fabulous umbrella species of leopards, can we just touch on and sort of guesstimate as to how many individuals we're speaking of, and if you can maybe give us some kind of split between, what percentage are mature males and female leopards?
So for leopard, it's quite a tough question actually, because there's no clear numbers about how many leopards are actually in South Africa. I'll give a number just now, but I was looking online a bit earlier. If you type numbers of wild dogs in South Africa, you're going to get a number very quickly, which is about 650 mature individuals. If you look at lions, about 2,300 in the wild. You look at cheetah, it's about 1.5. So you quite quickly get the number. If you type leopards number in South Africa on Google, you won't get the right number. So it's quite interesting. But like the estimates say there's between 2.8 and 11.6 thousand individuals. So let's guess that there's about 5,000 left. We can say it's probably in between. But it's very interesting that the range is very wide. And actually, this number was determined according to a habitat suitability index. So again, the researchers looked at the habitat and say, okay, looking at the habitat that is available for leopards, we can estimate that amount of leopards, there's that amount of leopard per square kilometer, per 100 square kilometers, sorry. And then we had this estimate in numbers. But out of this number, we said about only 60% are actually mature individuals. So mature males and female. All the other one would be youngsters and cubs. So yeah, it's a really difficult number to get around, but that's something that hopefully people will get together and work on actually in the very near future.
Well, that's exactly what brings us to my next point, which is, if the statistics for leopard numbers in South Africa is so far ranging, it's obviously down to the fact that they are surviving outside of protected areas. And because it's difficult to research them outside of protected areas, the data that is available is very scattered, right? Which is the whole point of the Ingwe Leopard Research. So what is the tools, Marine, that you are going to be tapping into so that you can get more data, and maybe in a year or 2 years' time, somebody can go Google what are the leopard numbers in South Africa, and there'll be a little bit of a more accurate number.
Well, that might be more than a year or two, and I think it's all about collaboration. But yeah, basically, this leopard project, the Ingwe Leopard Research, the main tool that we're using is citizen science. So it's basically trying to get as many people on board to collect data on leopards by sharing photographs of those leopards. And those photographs, I won't go too much into detail right now, but those photographs basically allow us to identify the leopards looking at the spot or rosette pattern. So all the pattern that they have on their body. And with that, we will actually be able to have an idea of how many leopards are out there. Of course, we'll never be able to count all of the leopards. Not all of the leopards in South Africa will be photographed. But with having so many people, so many eyes on the ground, let's say, with having people looking all the time in all directions for leopards and sharing this information with Ingwe, then we'll be able to build up a database of leopards photographs that can then be identified. And then we'll probably be able to have a number of leopards that are in South Africa. So, but that will have to be through collaboration and with working with all of the other leopard organizations that are also trying to do something similar.
Okay, so just to confirm for anybody who's listening about leopards for the first time, the markings that each individual leopard has are unique to that individual. So not only the rosette patterns and locations on the body, but I think also there's markings on the face of the animal that are very specific to that animal, the location of the whiskers, the color of the nose, and then in many cases the black band, the solid black that usually occurs on the chest of the leopard is also unique from one individual to another. So it doesn't really matter whether you've got a face-on image of the leopard or a side-on image of the leopard. Once that photograph has been captured and submitted, it goes into the big pile, and then, as you said, without going into too much detail, at some point in time it is cross-matched to other records of the same animal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So what do we need to think of, like all of the animals that have patterns, they are the same as our fingerprints. They are completely unique. So it goes for leopards, to giraffe, to zebras, to penguins, and like just for people, in case people wonder regarding lions, we really look at the whiskers pattern. So how the whiskers are actually, the first two lines of whiskers, how are they different from one line to another? But yeah, all of the marking that you mentioned are important for identification, and any angle of a leopard will help with identification.
So basically what you're asking is for people out and about, whether that's on a private game reserve or living on an estate that borders a game reserve, if they see a leopard in their back garden, they need to grab their smartphone and snap a shot and donate their image to conservation.
Yes, basically it's exactly the principle of citizen science, is that everyone can start participating to research and to conservation. So wherever you are, so here we're talking specifically in South Africa, but in whatever reserve that you're going to visit, you can actually start logging your leopard data on, whether it's using the app that Ingwe is using, or whether it's using other app like iMammals or iNaturalist that are also citizen science app. So everyone can really contribute. And this is allowing researchers to have a much bigger reach, to cover like much bigger geographical scale, to survey on a very long-term basis also. One of the biggest issues, I think, with research is globally, we have limited time and resources. So we do quite short-term surveys, even if they're being repeated over the years, but we can do quite short-term surveys. On a small scale, we often only focus on 1 or 2 reserves. But with citizen scientists, we can actually look bigger. We can get everyone on board, get everyone involved, get everyone excited. And also, it will help out with reconnecting people with nature, which was what we talked about initially at the beginning of this podcast, about the extension of experience. Now people are going to be like, oh, I'm going to this game reserve and actually want to contribute to research, and I'm going to donate my pictures, and now I've done my part also, and now I'm participating in the whole project. So yeah, that's what it is about.
It's amazing. I think there's opportunity here significantly because you've mentioned a couple of apps that are already open and available for people to submit photographs, not only of leopard, of course, but of other species as well. There may be some purists out there who frown upon citizen science, but I think you've explained sufficiently that it's just more legs on the ground, it's more eyes looking for this particular species or this particular animal. The important thing for me is that it's not only being used for leopards. We've seen quite significant success, particularly with birds, where there's 2 events held annually around the globe, where citizens are encouraged to take the weekend and log as many bird sightings as they can. Is this kind of what you're hoping Ingwe is going to produce?
Yes, absolutely. I think if it worked with bird, it would work even more easily, I want to say, with leopard that can be identified to the individual level. So yeah, this is what I'm hoping for. But I think I like to add, for researchers, citizen science can be a bit scary in the sense that, of course, the data are not as robust as they would be for when doing really a strict monitoring protocol, because now we're getting a lot of people involved that are not scientists, that are logging many information. But I think it is the researcher's responsibility to look at the best way to analyze those data and maybe to dig a bit deeper into how we're going to make sure that all of this data can be used for research and conservation. It's not because maybe we don't have the answers to everything that we should not get people involved. And in any case, getting the people involved, meaning that they're more concerned about wildlife, they're going to protect it, they're going to change their behaviors. In any case, it's a win-win situation.
Absolutely. And I think there's, again, just to make reference back to the caracal Hermes, the fact that he was given a name, some people might frown upon that and say that we are anthropomorph, that we are, yes, just
anthropomorphism.
Yes, thank you. But I think what it does is it adds a personality and it adds that connection that people should have in trying to coexist with wildlife, and particularly when it comes to our feline species of wildlife.
Yes.
So we've understood more or less that there's a serious lack of tangible information as far as leopard populations are concerned in South Africa. We understand that they are very well taken care of and researched within a protected area, such as a private game reserve or a national park like Kruger. You've also shared with us that your insight as to what the threats are that these peri-urban leopards are facing. So once we get the ball rolling, we've got Joe Soap with his camera submitting photographs. It's all starting to come through. You're the one who's sitting and analyzing the data and hopefully getting closer to what the real number of individuals are, if not the whole of South Africa, then particularly the region that you're working with quite closely at the moment. What is the region that you are focusing on at the moment to start this whole thing?
So currently, South Africa is divided in 9 provinces. So most of the research is done in the Limpopo province, which is in the north part of South Africa. So there's 2 different study sites. One is called the Waterberg region, which is a massive area that has less than 8% of the land that is actually in the protected areas. There's a lot of farms, a lot of infrastructure there, a couple of game reserve. And then the second area is the Hoedspruit area. So it's a small town, not far from the Kruger Park, about half an hour from one of the Kruger Park gates. And that area is also, it's surrounded by reserves, but it's also a small town with a growing amount of people that move there because of the wildlife and the lifestyle. So these are the two study areas, the Waterberg and the Hoedspruit area to start with.
Okay. Can you give us an indication of the size of the region that you are looking to cover in your research, just so that we can get an idea? I mean, South Africa as a country is 122.5 million hectares in size. So we need to have our listeners understand, why are we narrowing it down to the Hoedspruit and Waterberg areas?
So I think these two regions, they're quite well known to have normally quite a good leopard population. So that's why the research focused there, just because trying to demonstrate a model is better to demonstrate it in an area where there are actually leopards. And the Limpopo area is quite well known for leopards. But like the Waterberg is like 4.5 million hectares. So it's quite a big chunk of Limpopo. It's actually 1/3 of the whole of Limpopo region. And then for the Hoedspruit areas, at the moment, with all of the reserves involved, we're covering about 180,000 hectares. So it is very small compared to at the national, the scale of South Africa. But it will get replicated in other areas. So eventually we'll cover the whole of South Africa.
Great. I look forward to a positive Google search of leopard species in South Africa.
Yeah, me too.
So, Marine, given the size of the area that you are going to be focusing your research on, I mean, you mentioned Hoedspruit is a small little town surrounded by a number of reserves, and I'm assuming agricultural farm areas and things like that. But what are the types of outcomes that you would hope to reach once you've got your data and you've done your research?
I think one of the first one globally would be first to understand leopard population trend actually. So like we'll have to do surveys like throughout a couple of years, but to try to understand if the number of leopards in the areas are they being stable, are they decreasing or increasing? Unfortunately, I'm probably going to expect a decrease in the population, just because at the national level, it is said that there is like a decline, quite a heavy decline in terms of leopard population from one year to another. But that's something that I like to understand at the whole of Hoedspruit scale. But in terms of more, let's say like actionables. So of course, it's difficult to say now without having the result yet. But some of the things that could be done, I think it's like on the roads, maybe putting road sign or speed bumps or speed limit, to try to encourage people to be a bit more careful of their behavior that I mentioned earlier regarding wildlife. So although I think there's been one leopard that got hit by a car in a couple of years, so it's not many, but that doesn't mean that with like a growing human population, we should not be a bit more careful. And it's just about reminding people of where they live. Also, if we have a sign with a leopard there, or let's say for fun, a speed bump that has rosette pattern on it, it just reminds people where they live and that there are wildlife around, and can get them to adapt a bit more their behavior. That would be one thing. Other thing that
Sorry, I love that, by the way. I want to see a speed bump with leopard spots on it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it won't be a zebra crossing anymore. It'll be
a leopard crossing. I love it.
A rosette crossing.
Yes, please.
That could be something, yeah.
Yes. You were going to mention another, yes?
I think some of the other thing that can happen, if people really get attached to the leopard in the area, really get to know them. One, there are like mitigation measures that needs to be done, or when there needs to be a big community effort, like doing a massive snare removal in all of those reserves that are participating to the project, or to those farms, we can get really people on board and say, okay, this weekend, I don't know, let's say, but once per quarter, the whole community comes together and we're doing a snare sweep. The same way that we're doing, people can go in the street and remove all the trash. Now we go around and do massive snare sweep. It also will put pressure on those people who are putting the snares, say, oh, the whole community is actually watching us now. So that might also help out. And then globally also, when it would be about helping to mitigate conflicts with the farmers, because eventually I want also all of the people from the community, all of the farmers, to get involved in that research, to also share their like potential sighting that they might have, tracks and all of that. So when we have mitigation measures that needs to be done, also some of the people will be probably more willing to say, okay, yes, let's go and help that farmer. We're going to put a better fence. We're going to finance a guarding a dog, for example, because we don't want him to lose his livelihood, but we also don't want our leopards to get caught. So again, it's all about creating a really strong link between the people and the leopards, but also the wildlife. But we're talking about leopards now, about the leopard. And then when things need to happen, people will be more willing to help out and to contribute also. So yeah, these are just some of the ideas that can be done.
I think it's fabulous, and it sounds like a really noble cause, but I also know that it's buckets of work. I mean, besides the fact that you are the project manager for Ingwe, you're also a researcher, and so that falls to you. Again, these resources just don't fall out of the air. We laughed the other day saying nobody does conservation for the money, because there is no money in conservation. But yes, but on that note, I know that you've got something very special happening on the 1st of August. Do you want to just share a little brief info about that?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, so on the 1st of August, I'm actually launching our crowdfunding campaign. So the aim is to raise about £15,000. And with that money, all this money will be used to help expanding the network of reserves involved, to do educational content and to get involved with the community also. So these are just some ideas of what the money would be used, and of course, just to help with the whole operation in general. But what is very exciting about the campaign is that it's actually reward based. So for any donation that you would give to the project, you're going to get a reward, a present in return. So yeah, stay tuned for the 1st of August. The link will be all over social media, and then if you want to